She called me a broke baker in front of everyone. What she didn't know, the CEO she was trying to impress, worked for me. I'm Emily. I build quietly, and tonight I didn't have to say a word. Has anyone ever underestimated you so deeply they forgot to look closer? I'd love to hear your story too. People think power shows up wearing heels and a perfect smile. Mine has always arrived early, wearing flour-dusted sneakers, carrying a tray of pastries I shaped before the sun even peeked over East Austin. I get to the bakery at 5, not because I need to, but because there's something sacred about the hush before morning noise. The ovens are already humming, the dough rising just right under the proofing clothes. I walk the space like someone checking on an old friend. This place, our Carter family bakery, smells like brown sugar, cinnamon, and memories I didn't know were mine to carry. The bell over the front door jingled at 5:42 a.m. sharp. Mrs. Darlene never missed her Thursday drop-off, always with tamales, wrapped in a kitchen towel that had known more than one Christmas. "Mornin', mija," she said, placing the bundle down next to the register. "That wind's sharp today. Don't you forget your scarf?" She always brought me coffee. Too much sugar, never enough cream. We stood there sipping in silence, the kind that doesn't need fixing. She glanced at the handwritten menu board. "Still got that chalk up, huh?" she teased. I smiled. "Our style's vintage now." The first wave came at 6:30. Marco, the electrician from 2 blocks down, ordered his usual egg empanada and grinned like he hadn't had the same thing for 6 years. The Simmonses, our elderly couple who always split a cortado, walked in at 6:50 and argued softly about whether the front chairs were too close to the draft. I knew every story that passed through that door, every face, every quirk, and it felt enough until the door opened at 8:05 and in came Vanessa. She didn't belong in the bakery, at least not anymore. Her heels clicked on our worn tile like they were offended. She was wrapped in a sleek blazer, her hair pinned so precisely it looked sculpted. "Emily," she said, her eyes scanning the shelves, the counter, the customers. "Still here, huh?" I wiped my hands on a towel. "Good morning to you, too." She air-kissed me, twice, like she'd just come from Europe, and refused the cafecito I offered. "I'm on my way to a client meeting. Just thought I'd drop in. You know, touch base." Touch base, like I was a quarterly report. Her eyes landed on the chalkboard menu. "You should think about rebranding. Maybe get someone to do a proper logo. The whole handcrafted vibe is sweet, but it's starting to feel nostalgic." "Our customers like it," I said calmly. She smiled in that half-shrug way she had when she thought she was being gentle. "Sure. I just think it's time to grow the brand. Anyway, I'll send you an invite to my promotion gala. Big things are coming." She left before I could answer, her perfume lingering like disapproval. I stood behind the counter for a moment longer than I needed to. Then the bell rang again, and someone asked for a turkey panini. Extra pickles. I smiled and kept going. That evening, we had dinner at Helen's house. Mom's place was as pristine as ever. White tablecloths, wine glasses that didn't match but were close enough, and folded napkins shaped like swans. Vanessa had already arrived when I got there, sitting cross-legged in a leather chair, sipping something chilled. "Emily, you made it," Helen said, placing a hand briefly on my shoulder. "I thought maybe the bakery ran late." "I closed up early," I replied, removing my scarf and glancing around the room. Dinner was typical. Vanessa led every topic: her latest ad campaign, her new apartment with skyline views, a recent business trip that involved a private jet. Helen hung on to every word like scripture. I tried to mention a local grant I helped secure for immigrant-owned businesses, but before I finished, Helen turned to ask Vanessa where she got her earrings. And then, over dessert, it came. Vanessa, swirling her wine, looked straight at me and said, "Well, at least you'll always have job security. Bakeries never go out of style." Helen laughed. "She's not wrong," she said, reaching for another cookie. I smiled. That public kind of smile you give when you're at a dinner table with people who can't hear what's breaking inside you. Then I excused myself. The kitchen was cold compared to the dining room. I ran the faucet and leaned over the sink. The water was loud, but not loud enough to hide the breath that caught in my throat. One tear slipped down before I could stop it. I wiped it quickly, ashamed of it, and not because of them, because of me, because I still wanted them to see me. Behind me, the door creaked. Dad stood there holding a towel. He said nothing at first, just handed it to me like he had 100 times before, like nothing had changed, and yet everything had. "You don't have to talk louder, Em," he said quietly. "You just have to keep standing." That line landed somewhere deeper than logic. I looked at him and didn't deflect it. For once, I just nodded. I took the towel and pressed it to my face, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to hold something that felt like truth. Later, back at my apartment, I turned on my laptop. I wasn't thinking about the bakery, or Vanessa, or even Helen. I was thinking about what it meant to build something in silence. That's when I saw it. An email. Subject: Request for meeting. Jay Whitman, CEO. Dunchel. I stared at it without opening. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. Vanessa had her invitations, her spotlight, her stage, but maybe, just maybe, I'd already built the foundation for something bigger than a spotlight, and it was only just beginning. While Vanessa's name lit up invitations printed on thick ivory cardstock, mine lived in PDF footers, at the bottom of contracts she didn't even know existed. The bakery closed at 7:30 that night, and by 8, I'd changed out of my apron and into a faded hoodie that still smelled faintly of flour. The last customer's receipt lay curled on the counter while I made my way to the back office, the small space I'd carved behind racks of baking trays and sacks of sugar, where I built something no one in my family could see. The light overhead flickered. I gave the desk lamp a little tap and watched the screen wake up. My dashboard loaded. User growth curves, portfolio expansion in bilingual regions, a new partnership proposal from a Chicago credit union. Everything is humming. Vesta Capital, the microloan platform I'd spent 6 years developing, was no longer a passion project. It was a rising entity. I sipped cold cafecito and opened a spreadsheet flagged by my CTO, then toggled to a UI mockup for a mobile dashboard. We'd been exploring SMS reminders for non-tech savvy borrowers. My fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling notes from a conversation with Mrs. Darlene earlier that morning. She'd told me she forgot payment dates easily, unless someone texted her about bingo night. It sparked something. Empathy as UX design. Real problems answered quietly. I lost track of time until my eyes stung. The next morning, I rode the Metro Rapid downtown to the co-working space I used once a week. Brick walls, warm lighting, too many succulents. I nodded to a few familiar faces, freelance designers, nonprofit coordinators, a quiet guy who coded with noise-canceling headphones and a bowl of jelly beans. By noon, I sat in a private glass-paned pod with 2 advisors from Whitman Row Capital on video call. The deal was ready. We'd spent 5 months negotiating terms. The final draft had been signed 2 days prior by their board and mine. Vesta Capital now owned 51% of their firm, technically of Vanessa's entire division. James Whitman hadn't responded to my follow-up yet, just one cryptic note: looking forward to meeting in person. My fingers hovered over the red confirm button on the deal's digital portal. One click and it would be real, fully public after the gala. I didn't hesitate. Click. As I shut the laptop, a strange sensation rose, not adrenaline, not pride. Relief, as if I could finally breathe, not because the world would know, but because I no longer cared if it did. That evening, Ethan made stir-fry with too much ginger and hummed a Billie Holiday tune he didn't know the words to. He'd stayed late at school helping students rehearse a civics debate. I watched him set the table, mismatched bowls, chipped mugs. It was sweet, honest, but when he looked at me, something flickered and missed. "You've been quieter lately," he said, handing me a fork. "Everything okay at the bakery?" "Everything's fine." He sat. "You know you don't have to prove anything to them, Em. You've already won, just by being you." I smiled. "That's kind of you." But inside, a different voice whispered, "You still don't see it." The bakery was part of me, but only part. And Ethan, for all his kindness, only ever looked at that part. He didn't ask what came after closing hours. Maybe he didn't want to know. We cleaned up in silence. I answered emails on my phone while he rinsed the pans. There was a comfort in the smallness of our evening, but also a wall I couldn't explain. Just past 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Vanessa. "Hey, Em!" Her voice was bright, rehearsed. I could practically hear her smiling. "So, big news! I'm being promoted. Senior Marketing Director. I'm throwing a gala next week, full-blown champagne and sequins. And I was thinking, you're so amazing with logistics and food service and all. Would you mind helping manage the catering team? It'd mean a lot." There was no pause, no real invitation, just Vanessa doing what she always did, assigning roles. My eyes drifted to the corner of my desk where the signed merger file still sat open on the screen. "Sure," I said softly. "I'd be happy to help." She squealed. "You're the best. I'll send you the timeline and vendor list." I hung up and stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent light above me blinked once, like it agreed. "Funny," I whispered aloud, "how you asked me to serve." I swiveled to my desk, found my planner, and flipped to December 12th. I circled it in red ink. Underneath, I wrote 3 words in small, deliberate letters. Stage set. Vanessa's night sparkled like a dream made of glass and glitter. Everything was set to shimmer. The rooftop of the Whitman Row building had been transformed into a magazine spread, candlelight, string lights, glassware that cost more than my month's rent back in grad school. Jazz curled through the speakers like perfume. This wasn't a party, it was a declaration, which, of course, made it the perfect place for something unplanned. I arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, slipping through the staff entrance, wearing a black wrap dress that felt deliberately invisible. Not plain, just quiet. It matched my mood. Vanessa met me with a clip in her step and a clipboard in her hand. "Oh, thank God," she sighed. "We're short on staff and the kitchen is a mess. I need you to help with the service team. And please, stay off the main floor as much as possible. This is kind of a high-profile night for me." I nodded, no surprise in my chest. "Whatever you need." She paused, eyeing my dress. "Maybe tuck in your hair or something? Just, keep it tidy." Of course. I made my way past the staging area, where trays of goat cheese crostini lined up like soldiers. The rooftop was still filling in, guests sipping cocktails, laughing softly, adjusting their watches and commenting on traffic and Q4 reports. I walked among them like mist. My presence was welcome, expected, but not registered. And that was fine. For now. At 7:15, Vanessa floated across the marble with the same elegance she'd perfected in college. Sharp heels, sharper smile. She was magnetic. I watched from a distance as she introduced her co-workers to Helen and Tom, charming everyone like a practiced diplomat. "My sister's somewhere in the back," I heard her say, loud enough for the table. "She's helping with catering tonight. Honestly, she's great at keeping trays full and chaos low." I kept my eyes on the wine flutes I was refilling. "Hospitality is sort of her thing," she added with a wink. They laughed. Someone said, "That's sweet." And maybe it was. Sweet, like a compliment with the wrapper still on. Near the entrance, I spotted Ethan. He looked uncomfortable, slightly out of step with the tuxedoed crowd, but his eyes found mine, and he smiled. I smiled back, gently, briefly, then turned before he could make his way over. I wasn't ready for softness. At 8:09, everything shifted. No fanfare, no music cue, just the sensation of the room contracting and then holding its breath. James Whitman had arrived. He entered like a tide, not loud, not grand, but undeniable. He wore a suit that said restraint, not wealth. His presence was what turned heads, not what he wore. Vanessa saw him instantly. Her posture changed. She moved toward him like a dancer hitting her mark, smile bright, arms relaxed but rehearsed. "Mr. Whitman," she said, offering both hands like a well-placed photo op, "we're so honored to have you here tonight." He shook her hand politely. "Thank you for the invitation." His eyes scanned the room. I saw the moment they caught mine. It was subtle, but real, a flicker of clarity, like seeing a familiar landmark in a new city. He stepped slightly to the side, narrowing the distance between us. Vanessa's smile tightened. Let me introduce, but he raised a finger, eyes never leaving me. Ms. Carter? He asked. I stepped forward slowly, placing my tray down on a side table. Good evening, James, I said. Vanessa blinked. Wait, Emily? That's my sister. She's just helping with logistics tonight. James turned fully toward her, calm as ever. Your sister, he said, is the architect of the acquisition we finalized this morning. The music faltered. Someone dropped a fork. James didn't flinch. Vesta Capital now holds 51% of Whitman Row, he continued, and your sister, Emily, is our new majority partner. A silence fell so thick it seemed to mute the city itself. Helen gasped, her hand tightening around her flute. Then it shattered. The glass hit the floor in a crisp cascade, tiny splinters catching the candlelight like constellations falling. No one moved. Whitman gestured toward me. This entire transition, strategic modeling, merger design, even team retention, was her vision, quietly executed, flawlessly. He turned back to the group. Everyone, please welcome Emily Carter, CEO of Vesta Capital, and the reason we're standing here tonight. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded. Vanessa's face was frozen in something between disbelief and fury. You run a bakery, she said like it was an accusation. I do, I answered, and I run this. She turned to Helen, who looked stricken. Ethan took a step forward but stopped, unsure where to place himself in a room that had just rewritten the script. Vanessa's voice cracked. You didn't tell me. You never asked. But why keep it quiet? I inhaled deeply. You asked me to serve, Vanessa, I said, voice soft but clear. I did. A pause, just not in the way you thought. The music had stopped. Conversations hadn't restarted. Every eye in the room still lingered on us, not with mockery but with recalibration. They were watching two stories collapse and one emerge. James raised his glass toward me. To new leadership, he said. There was no cheer, just a slow, rippling murmur. But it was enough. I turned slightly, letting my gaze scan the skyline, the moon caught behind a glass tower, soft and full. Tonight wasn't a power move. It was a return to my name, to my voice, to my space in the room. People clapped, but it wasn't applause. Not really. It was a reflex, like the last twitch of a stunned animal. A few polite hands came together, unsure whether they were celebrating or salvaging dignity. Then the room hushed. Conversations turned into murmurs. Eye contact became slippery. No one quite knew what to do with the moment, so they defaulted to silence. Vanessa had vanished. One moment, her silver dress caught the candlelight like a flare. The next, she was gone. All that remained were her heels, abandoned by the staff hallway, like two exclamation points at the end of a sentence no one wanted to read. I didn't look for her. I just stood at the far edge of the rooftop, away from the buzz of confusion and the perfume of broken expectations. The city stretched beneath me, full of noise I couldn't hear. The wind had picked up, cold and sudden, lifting the hem of my black dress and the edges of my thoughts. Behind me, someone cleared their throat. Soft, uncertain. Emily? I turned. Ethan stood a few steps away, his hands in the pockets of his blazer. He looked older than he had that morning, or maybe just smaller. You're Vesta Capital? He asked, blinking hard. The words hung between us like steam in cold air. You've been this? All this time? I let out a slow breath. I wasn't hiding anything, Ethan. I was building, quietly. He shook his head, confused. But why didn't you tell me? I met his gaze, and for the first time I saw the gap between us not as a crack, but a canyon. Because you never asked. That landed harder than I meant it to, but it was true. In every conversation where I hinted, he redirected. In every moment where he could have dug deeper, he skimmed the surface. He stepped forward, hesitant. I didn't mean to make you feel small. You didn't have to mean it, I said softly. You just had to let it keep happening. He nodded once, like he'd heard that before. Maybe in another relationship, maybe in a dream. Then, slowly, he reached for my hand. His touch was gentle, familiar, seeking forgiveness. I let him hold it enough for one breath. Then I pulled away, slow and soft, like untying a ribbon instead of cutting a rope. He looked down. I opened my clutch and handed him a white envelope, unmarked, clean. "What's this?" he asked, not really needing the answer. "I filed last week," I said, "just in case you still thought I needed your approval to live my life." He held the envelope like it was glass. "I didn't know you could leave me." "That's the thing, Ethan," I said. "You never thought I would." He didn't respond. He just stepped back, one foot, then the other, like a retreat without surrender. From the elevator side of the rooftop, I saw two more figures approaching, one slow, one hesitant. Helen walked like she was holding her breath. Her eyes were wide, lips thin, hands white-knuckled around her designer shawl. Her pearls looked tighter around her neck than usual, like they might crack under pressure. Tom walked a step behind her, his hands finally free from his coat pockets, shoulders square but quiet. "You didn't tell us," Helen said, not accusing, not angry, just disoriented. "No," I replied. "Why?" she asked. Her voice cracked at the edge. I studied her. I saw not just my mother, but the collection of everything she believed was safety, status, order, presentation. The thought that I had dismantled her illusion terrified her more than the reality of who I'd become. "Would you have listened?" I asked. Her lips parted. No words came. Then Tom spoke. "No," he said simply. Helen turned to him, startled. He looked at me. "We wouldn't have. That's on us." He took a breath. "But now we know. That's on us too." There it was. Not a confession. A reckoning. I felt something inside me release, not like triumph, but like air leaving a room after too long under pressure. He didn't say it with apology. He said it with weight. Helen blinked, her hands now trembling against her shawl. "I didn't do this to prove anything," I said, voice steady. "I did it because I was tired of apologizing for being more than what you wanted me to be." Tom nodded. Helen didn't. That silence was her answer, but I didn't need it anymore. I stepped back toward the elevator, passing tables half cleared, flowers already wilting in their vases, the scent of vanilla and disappointment mixing in the air. My phone buzzed. I pulled it from my pocket, half expecting another cold inquiry from someone in PR or finance, but it wasn't that. It was Mrs. Darlene. "Bakery's quiet tonight. Left the lights on in case you swing by. Got fresh dough rising." I stared at the screen, not because I didn't know what to say, but because that text said everything. A warm kitchen, a light left on, a rhythm that never asked me to explain. I smiled. Then I pressed the elevator button. The smell hit me before I even opened the door. Yeast, cinnamon, and something softer. Something like forgiveness, slow and steady, rising through the floorboards. It curled around the windows, fogging the glass. It clung to the corners of the ceiling. It pressed gently into my collar as I stepped through the door. A crisp December morning, just 5 days since the gala, and yet it felt like I'd been gone longer. The bakery hadn't changed. The frost still crept along the window panes, lacing its fingers around the edges. The same dull jingle of the overhead bell, the same hum from the ancient refrigerator that groaned with character more than function. The last time I'd been here, I cried into a sink and told myself that rising dough could wait. That silence was stronger than confrontation. Maybe I could live in the shadows and still be whole. This time I reached for the flour without hesitation, not out of habit, but out of choice. My apron hung on the back hook near the prep counter. Same as always, a little frayed, a coffee stain near the pocket from last spring. I ran my hand along the fabric. The cotton still remembered the shape of my body. The loop slipped over my head like it never left. From the kitchen, I heard a soft scrap, metal against tile, and then the low hum of an old country tune. Familiar. Tom was already there. He stood near the sink, sweeping flour into a neat pile with one hand, while the other nursed a chipped mug of black coffee. He looked up as I entered, didn't flinch, didn't speak, just gave a nod, slow and quiet, before turning back to his rhythm. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. He handed me a warm mug without asking how I took it. I set down my bag, rolled up my sleeves, and together we fell into that familiar cadence. The one we knew before words got heavy. I proofread the cinnamon rolls. He folded the dough for the sourdough batch. We moved like planets in orbit, aware of each other, never colliding. Flour on my hands, yeast in the air, and the faint hiss of heat filling the room as ovens clicked on. Outside, the world hadn't stopped. Inside, it felt like it had never left. At 7:30, the front door chimed. "Hope you're decent," Mrs. Darlene called, pushing through the door with a basket tucked under her arm and a scarf wrapped twice around her neck. "I've got food and opinions." I wiped my hands on my apron and walked out to meet her. She looked at me for half a second longer than usual, then smiled wide. "Well, look at you," she said, stepping close. Apron back on and hands covered in flour. "Looks like home's got its girl again." "I guess it does," I said, and I meant it. She handed me the basket, warm tamales inside, wrapped tight in cloth. Then from her coat, she pulled out a folded card, edges slightly bent. "You can't always fix the world," she said, "but you can feed it." I didn't speak. I just took the card, smiled, and pinned it behind the register, right next to the faded Thanksgiving promo from last year. It felt like it belonged there. By 8, the regulars began to trickle in. Nothing dramatic, just the morning crowd, the woman who always ordered a black coffee and waited exactly 2 minutes for it to cool. The old man who only ever bought a muffin and left a $10 tip, a pair of nurses heading off the night shift. They didn't ask where I'd been. They just nodded, smiled, accepted the coffee and the warmth like always. The radio played faint Christmas music, Bing Crosby this time, warbling through the static. In the back office, I found a box on the chair near the desk, no note on top, just my name scrawled in careful handwriting. Emily. I opened it slowly. Inside, a photo. I must have been 7. Sitting on the counter with Tom, both of us wearing aprons 2 sizes too big. We were covered in flour, laughing at something off camera. His hair was darker then, my bangs were crooked. Next to the photo, my oldest apron, the one I thought was gone, folded neatly, and on top of it, a single yellow sticky note. I kept this. "Mom." That was all. She wasn't here. No speech, no apology. Just a box, a photo, and the cloth she once told me was too stained to keep. It wasn't an answer, but it was something. I folded the apron once more, gently, and placed it back in the box. Then I walked out to the front counter and pulled a small flyer from my bag. Handwritten. Simple. Vesta Local. Business grants for East Austin entrepreneurs. Start here, grow here, stay here. I taped it to the window beside the holiday hours. Then I stepped back. I didn't just come home. I planted roots. Just as I was washing flour from my hands, the bell rang again. A young woman stepped through the door, tentative. She looked around, uncertain, then stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, eyes wide. "You're the CEO from that podcast, right?" I paused, smiled. "Sometimes," I said, brushing flour off my cheek. "But today, I'm just your baker." I used to think success sounded like applause, crowds clapping, emails flooding in, the rhythmic confidence of heels across a polished floor. I thought validation came in public form, loud, visible, official. But now? Now it sounds like a scratchy Willie Nelson tune on the old bakery radio. It sounds like Dad humming off-key in the back while sweeping, unaware that his hum anchors the morning like yeast anchors dough. December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas. The East Austin Community Center was full of folding chairs, mismatched mugs, and the quiet chaos of people trying. I stood behind a folding table with a name card in front of me, my name, in black Sharpie on a bent tent fold, Emily Carter, Vesta. Capital. Funny thing, no one asked me to bring a deck. No slides, no suits, just a voice, just a story. And that felt right. The room smelled of cinnamon, cafecito, and plastic pine garlands. Laughter of children floated in from the hallway. Flyers flapped on a corkboard by the door, promoting everything from dance classes to home tax repair. The ceiling tiles were stained in one corner, but no one noticed. Or they didn't care. This place wasn't curated. It was real. I was the last speaker. A small business panel, mostly for local teens and early entrepreneurs. The audience had dwindled a bit, chairs creaking as people shifted, some standing by the back wall. I didn't talk about venture capital or market penetration. I talked about burnt loaves, rejected grant applications, the day our delivery truck broke down and we biked trays across town. I told them about fear and flour, about doing things quietly, again and again, until they worked. I used to think I had to prove something, I said, not looking at my notes. Now I think I just had to build it so someone else could stand on it. There were no claps when I finished. Just stillness. And that was enough. Afterward, a boy lingered, maybe 18. Hoodie pulled halfway over his head, scuffed sneakers. He hovered near the edge of the table, then finally stepped forward. "Do you think someone like me could ever make something real?" I looked at him, not past him, not through. "You already are," I said. "You just don't see it yet." "But I do." He nodded once, not in agreement but in consideration, like he was tucking the thought into a pocket. Mrs. Darlene swept in with tamales and plastic wrap like a parade float in human form. She hugged me sideways, whispering in my ear, "You're what this city needed. Sugar." And didn't even know it, Nanchao. I could only smile. My throat was too full to speak. Dad, Tom, was in the back, arms crossed, sleeves rolled, leaning against the doorframe. When I met his eyes, he didn't nod. He didn't need to. He just stayed. As the chairs scraped and people gathered coats, I started packing my papers. That's when I noticed her. Helen, my mother, near the door. She didn't come in, didn't smile, just stood there, hands tucked into her coat, and in one of them, a small, brown paper bag. She scanned the room once, then walked to a nearby chair, set the bag down gently. No eye contact, no fanfare. She didn't say a word. She just turned and left. When the room emptied, I opened the bag. Inside, a photo. One of us, from years ago. Me, Tom, and Helen behind the bakery counter. I couldn't have been older than 8. I was holding a dough scraper like a trophy. Tom's beard was dusted in flour. Helen was laughing. A real, unguarded laugh I hadn't seen in a long time. Below it, a folded index card. The lines faded, grease-marked. Emily's first empanada, written in my own crooked 9-year-old handwriting. And, tucked behind that, a note. "Maybe we both forgot who you were. Thank you for reminding me." That night, I went back to the bakery. Tom was locking up. He didn't ask why I came. He didn't hand me keys or questions. He just handed me the broom. We didn't talk. We swept. He hummed. The oven clicked softly behind us, warm but not demanding. The storefront smelled like sugar, wood, and peace. The world, for once, didn't need fixing. Later that night, in the quiet office, I opened my old journal. The same one I started before anyone cared who Emily Carter was, the same one that held pie recipes and seed stage projections and old grocery lists. I picked up a pen and wrote, "I didn't build Vesta to be seen. I built it so others could be. That's what I know now. Visibility was never the goal, but truth was always enough." I closed the journal, turned off the light, and let the silence be what it was. Home. That night, when I closed my journal and turned off the light, there was nothing left to prove, only something to preserve, truth, and the quiet gentleness I had finally reclaimed. I thought back on all the years I stayed quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because no one had been ready to listen. In life, sometimes we don't need to win. We just need to be seen, fully and honestly, for who we are. So if you've ever felt like you weren't enough, maybe it's because you were never meant to be small. Maybe you were always meant to be whole. Have you ever held your silence out of love, only to realize the truth was the real gift? If this story stirred something in you, I'd be honored to hear your reflections. Sometimes sharing quietly is the loudest kind of courage.